I think I have Pam and recording kind of, those two
Connected.
live in my brain rent free. Last week you had a long and lovely flow stream of consciousness about chapter 2. Anything anybody wanted to share or remember? Hannah's song was part of it, or I don't know if you redid that or not.
Yeah, we had done that with you.
We had done that the week
Yep.
before. That we had gotten as far
Moved
as the
on.
end of Hannah's song the week before.
Okay.
I think we just talked a lot about how Eli's sons were, they called wicked,
Wicked.
was the word, and then sort of how damaging it can be when church leaders go off the rails and take advantage of their positions of power.
Yeah.
And then
We do that, don't we?
And then the idea that God came down pretty hard on the whole family because of the son's transgressions.
Yeah.
That's hard.
Was that
And
anything?
I think we related a lot of it to things that in the world today too,
Yep.
that's
exactly.
going on.
Yep.
Especially in terms of church leaders.
Mhm.
Embezzling or trying to scam people.
I think we brought up Olstein.
What was that?
Joel Osteen.
Oh,
He's
Osteen,
just a
yes.
televangelist.
Yeah, he's one of the great examples of the prosperity gospel gone awry.
He's the one that wouldn't let the hurricane victims in
No,
Exactly.
to his property.
Mhm.
Yep.
he certainly wouldn't.
And yet we have parishioners who
Yes,
still
we
watch
do.
Joel Osteen on Sundays. Oh my Lord. And we still have clergy, friends of mine, who try to be Joel Osteen or try to,
It's
mimic
addictive to
him.
listen to that. I mean,
yeah.
you know, it's like, oh, if only this were really true.
You know, I'm also reading the new Trump book. I know you might be like, how can you stomach it? Because I'm obsessed with politics.
Trump wrote it? I mean, he
No,
ghost
no,
wrote
I
it?
would never.
I
No,
can't
this
put
is
two
Maggie
words.
Haberman
Oh,
from the New York Times.
oh.
Her first book. It's long, but it's really well written, and it's more of a character analysis of just what made him this way, and then catches up to the. I'm presuming it's going to catch up to the presidency eventually, but where was I going with this? There's a reason there. It's the success that he had in politics is due directly to his success on television,
Right.
which was ironic because by all the accounting, his foundation and empire and everything was in disarray in the early 2000s. It was just like paint peeling off the walls of Atlantic City casinos and driving things into the ground. And if he hadn't turned into a television star where none of that was real, in fact the boardroom at Trump Tower apparently was just looks like a giant closet. And so they build all these things as sets and all, and he comes up with this tagline and that you're fired. And so people think I get it, that people that ended up voting for him or supporting him or still do think they can point to him and say, well, that's a smart businessman. I've watched how he runs his business, and the people are trying to say you're not watching how he runs his business. You're watching a television show, a highly produced thing. And I think the same thing can be said about Joel Osteen and others too, is, it's not the thing that's addictive is the kind of cult of personality.
Well, they had also that book that we're reading for the Sunday morning talk, the church cracked open. It's kind of all kind of intertwined. I mean, you reading that, it's just like it really helps to explain what's happening.
Yeah.
Exactly.
This is all relevant to what we're going to get at here, I think, in the story of Saul, which is kind of the latter portion of this book. But we're still on young Samuel at the moment, and we're on chapter 3. He's still but a boy. Would anyone like to read from there? I've got multiple copies in front of me, but anybody else want to read chapter 3? It's a short chapter. You can probably read all the whole chapter.
Sure.
Greg, go for it. You've got, and Leslie, we'll get you next. You've got the New American Bible.
New American Bible.
Great.
Revelation to Samuel. During the time young Samuel was minister to the Lord under Eli, a revelation of the Lord was uncommon and vision infrequent. One day Eli was asleep in his usual place. His eyes had lately grown so weak that he could not see. The lamp of God was not yet extinguished, and Samuel was sleeping in the temple of the Lord where the ark of God was. The Lord called to Samuel, who answered, "Here I am." He ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me." "I did not call you," Eli said. "Go back to sleep." So he went back to sleep. Again, the Lord called Samuel, who rose and went to Eli. "Here I am," he said, "you called me." But he answered, "I did not call you, my son. Go back to sleep." At that time, Samuel was not familiar with the Lord because the Lord had not revealed anything to him as yet. The Lord called Samuel again for the third time. Getting up and going to Eli, he said, "Here I am, you called me." Then Eli understood that the Lord was calling the youth. So he said to Samuel, "Go to sleep, and if you are called, reply, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" When Samuel went to sleep in his place, the Lord came and revealed his presence, calling out as before, "Samuel, Samuel." Samuel answered, "Speak, for your servant is listening." The Lord said to Samuel, "I'm about to do something in Israel that will cause the ears of everyone who hears it to ring. On that day, I will carry out in full against Eli everything I threatened against his family. I announced to him that I am condemning his family once and for all because of this crime. Though he knew his sons were blaspheming God, he did not reprove them. Therefore, I swear to the family of Eli that no sacrifice or offering will ever expiate its crime." Samuel then slept until morning, when he got up early and opened the doors of the temple of the Lord. He feared to tell Eli the vision, but Eli called to him, "Samuel, my son." He replied, "Here I am." Then Eli asked, "What did he say to you? Hide nothing from me. May God do thus and so to you if you hide a single thing he told you." So Samuel told him everything and held nothing back. Eli answered, "He is the Lord. He will do what he judges best." Samuel grew up, and the Lord was with him, not permitting any word of his to be without effect. Thus all Israel from Dan to Beersheba came to know that Samuel was an accredited prophet of the Lord. The Lord continued to appear at Shiloh. He manifested himself to Samuel at Shiloh through his word, and Samuel spoke to all Israel.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a question.
Okay, fire away.
I did not, of course, I haven't been here for the first two chapters, but is this saying that because Samuel or because Eli didn't reprove his sons for their blasphemous behavior, that he was no longer worthy of
In favor?
forgiveness?
No longer chosen.
No longer chosen, yeah. Where's the forgiveness part?
Well,
And he knew what was going on, but didn't do anything about it.
well,
Right.
what made me think about the forgiveness part is that no sacrifice or offering will ever expiate its crime.
Yes.
So does that mean he's not going to ever be able to
Nothing
get
you can do, yeah.
to be
it's-
forgiven? So he's going to be living without God.
Well,
for
I
the rest
wouldn't
of his
say
life?
it's not forgiven, it's just that he can't undo what's been done.
Okay.
And I think I detect a little urgency on God's part in here. It's actually kind of personable. God is like, "Samuel, for my sake,
Please, listen."
would you please answer?" And then he's like, "Finally, I'm about to do something in Israel, and I was about to do it without your help because you won't answer." I get this sense that God is a little impatient, and I think with Eli too, it's a little bit of like, sorry, Eli, you had your chance. It was not meant to be, and I'm moving on to Samuel.
And then later on, Eli just is like, "Okay, well, he's going to do whatever he's going to do."
Yeah,
It's like
he kind of relents. He goes, "Well,
too late, little too late, almost.
It does exactly." And then it's going to set up what's going to happen when Saul and David come in, and they're not going to lay over quite as easily.
But wasn't that relenting just part of the culture at that time too?
Yeah,
I mean,
clearly
it was kind of like, it was more black and white. There was no gray areas like we have today in a
I
lot
think
of
so.
things
Yeah,
with the culture, because it was, you were either right or you were wrong, and if you were wrong, too bad.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I'm not sure that this was directed personally at Eli, that his personal sins will not be covered over. I think it has to do with the fact that Eli's family is no longer going to be in charge of the priesthood. And that's
Oh, okay.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that's what
I
we had
think
in chapter
it's
3.
more that Eli's house shall not be expiated or covered over or forgiven, because this is a point at which part of what's going on here is sharing why the Eli's priesthood did come to an end, and it passed on to a different group.
Okay,
Yeah.
And
makes
that,
sense.
the thing that God is working on is this move to start to let the people have kings, there's a change coming. And it's just Eli's much circumstantial in some ways. Yeah.
Well, and it seems to me like if they're actually being taken out of the priesthood, then they would probably be shunned.
Yeah.
They were at the top of the power structure, kind of.
Yeah.
And now they're not.
Right.
God took them out of that.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that there would be some social shunning involved.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a lot of repetition in here, and that reminds me to say or underscore again that this is an oral culture written down. So in Hebrew, the English doesn't do it very much justice, but the Hebrew would have kind of a sing-songy repetition to it.
Mhm.
So again, because people were hearing things they did not have bulletins to look at to reference. They had to pay attention to. And believe you me, I think about it often. Should I take the readings out of the printed bulletins and just make you all listen to it? But there's too many variables, to use the lost term. Too many variables, such as the microphone's not working properly, or people not speaking into the microphones,
Or someone's making noises.
or children are
Joyous
making joyous
noises.
noises to the Lord. Exactly right.
All right.
So, but in before all of those conveniences in the temple, where they probably did not have children, you would hear these repetitions of "Here I am," which they must say that phrase, which in Hebrew is "Hanani." Must have heard Hanani about 10 times, so that if you're a kind of more peasanty poor person, not educated, what's your takeaway? What did you learn in temple today? Hanani. That's a pretty good takeaway. So my takeaway is that when God calls, I say, Hanani, here I am. And my professor of Hebrew, Judy Fentress Williams, who wrote the book, and we've had her as a guest before, she said in her class, she taught us Hanani. It's the same phrase that Moses says at the burning bush. It comes up a lot. It's also in Isaiah. Here I am, or here am I. It's the reason you have that beautiful song that everybody loves. I guarantee you it's the most popular song at Grace New Lenox is "Here I Am, Lord." But that phrase, Hanani, she had us say it when she called roll in seminary every day, so.
Hanani, you had to say Hanani?
John, Carol, Greg, Hanani. Check us off. Yeah. Yes, they take roll in seminary. So it was really special. We actually ended up having, we made t-shirts for our Hebrew class at the end of the year and gave everybody kind of like jerseys. We put like numbers on the back, and it said, we wrote the seminary's name letters in Hebrew, VTS, which is not a Hebrew word at all. It's nothing. But on the back, we wrote Hanani in English. So
That's
I
probably
can't
why
fit in
she
that shirt
took
anymore.
roll, so that you had the opportunity to
Well,
say
yeah.
Hanani.
What's my takeaway? It's like Hanani, pretty important phrase. That's also why you get the repetition of Eli saying, let's take, for example, the Gospel of Luke, who I often lift up as the best writer in the New Testament. Luke would say, boy, this is not the most economic storytelling here to spend all this real estate saying the same thing over and over again. But this is the modus operandi of the Old Testament, because it's such an oral culture to repeat things. So verse 9, therefore Eli said to Samuel, go, lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.
Well,
A verse later, you hear, speak, for your servant is listening.
Well, I would say though too, that like with me, and if it were me and God is calling me, I would never think that God would be calling me.
Right.
So
you would
it would
go
have to be
to Eli,
somebody to
right.
say,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd go to somebody.
What is
and
it?
they'd say- yeah, and they'd say, well, that's God calling you. Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Don't,
Me?
yeah, and don't underestimate that it takes 3 instances. Three is an incredibly important number in all of scripture and tradition. You know, it's once, twice, 3 times a lady, right? 3 times. Well, the 3rd time they figure out what's happening.
Everything's 3. in
The
Bible.
Jesus
Everything.
Story Bible does this story beautifully. I'm
Oh,
like, go
does
get
it? Oh,
just
we
so
might
you
have
guys
to
can see
scan
it.
some of that. Yes.
Yeah, just that it's a little boy, and he's like, "What?" And he's like, "Go back to bed." What? And then I was like, "I think he's talking to you," and it's just very sweet.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
I need to run to a quick.
Okay.
Which I thought might happen, but I'll be back very soon.
All right. I hope
With a
you come
friend.
with
Oh, you gotta go
a
get her?
little one with you.
Okay. I'll be right
Fantastic.
back. Yeah. The no bathroom thing is too much.
Yeah, that would.
I
be-
would
That's-
say the
would be-
bathroom thing would be
Right
the
after we
issue.
prayed about it, they just,
They
I guess
said-
they made a decision.
They said she should be here.
Okay.
Wishing for her. I'll be right back.
Great. And for those at home, we've I can't wipe the smile off my face because there's a lot of activity happening at the church today, which is, I think I'm so attuned to where we were just 2 years ago, and it was me down here by myself in the dark recording video. So today we've got the sew-a-thon ladies in the parish hall. We've got a packed house for Bible study down here. There is somebody drilling outside, and I can only assume it's for the best. We might have a child coming in, and then we've also got the fire department coming in, and then we've got furniture strewn out all over the place. I love it. It's awesome. This church is alive. So, but I'm saying all to say, sorry if you hear some ambient noise in the background.
Frankenstein.
We'll survive. Comments on? Go ahead. Can you hear us?
She's
David's on mute.
cutting
I
out.
was drawn to verse 7.
Go
Where
ahead,
it says,
David.
where it says Samuel did not know the Lord. He'd been working in the temple for all this time. He had no
Yeah.
idea. He had no idea what was happening when God was talking to him. All this service he'd been giving, and yet it seemed to be totally divorced from actually a knowledge of the Lord. I think this is a very condemning passage in terms of what was going on in
Yes.
Eli's time.
No
But
wonder Eli got kicked out.
Yes. I wish I had a Hebrew Bible in front of me because I would love to know what no, K-N-O-W is translated, or what the Hebrew word is.
Yada.
Yada, that's the one. Yep.
Yada.
Yada, that's it. So Yada, this is the way I always remembered it in class. Yoda. I was like, Yoda knows everything. So the Yada, that's how you learn the vocabulary. Okay, yeah. So Yada means when sometimes the Bible will be a little, or I should say the Old Testament will be a little coy about things of an adult nature. So they'll speak in euphemism. Think about in Ruth when Boaz puts his cloak over her. She says, "Spread your cloak over me." Well, that is a euphemism. You don't need me to finish the sentence there, what we're talking about. And here, and as in Genesis, the first time it comes up, you talk about know, K-N-O-W, does not mean knowledge. It means knowing someone intimately, and is often used as a euphemism for sex. Basically, something she knew him, or David knew Bathsheba is probably going to come up too. What's going on here? Why would you use that here to talk about God? It just means Eli did not know God in a very intimate way. Obviously not in a sexual way. That would be really weird. But it's saying knowing on a deeper level, and you're right. It's kind of damning for Eli as well. And then for Samuel later, it says did not yet know.
Yeah,
not ready yet. Right. Pretty powerful.
Knowledge of God, he had not.
Yeah. And if you think about it too, just to get in there a little bit, that using that word know to be a euphemism for sexual intimacy is perfect sense, because inevitably you end up knowing someone in a much different way than you know them elsewhere. Yeah. Okay. Beautiful.
Greg,
Oh, yes.
the one thing that kind of got me was, I don't know how Samuel would have felt when Eli comes to him and asks him to tell him everything that God told him.
Right.
I would be quite fearful. I'm not one to try to tell somebody that what God's gonna do to them.
I
And
love
I
that.
Especially
think that I almost think because Samuel's so truthful, he could do that. But there are a lot of people out there that would lie. Say, well, it wasn't too bad. It wasn't too much, and he'd hem and haw about it. But I'm sure he was probably fearful about telling Eli what God told him because it was against Eli's family.
I think you're right. It's privileged information. Absolutely. And then just the knowledge of that God is speaking to you as opposed to Eli, that it's, unfortunately, there's no line in here where God says, now don't say anything, which is funny because Jesus takes great pains to do that. Yeah, learns from this mistake and goes, by the way, keep it on the QT, You're absolutely right. I mean, it's there's some tension in there between the two. Absolutely.
It is, to me, it indicates that Eli must have known or acknowledged Samuel's special role in this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he must have recognized him as a prophet or a future prophet.
Exactly. Yeah. And even if he was disgruntled about it, it's just it's kind of a Game of Thrones thing going on. Yeah.
And it really
Dalai
doesn't indicate at all what Samuel's age was at this point.
No, just as a boy.
He's just a boy.
Yeah.
Could have been 6, could have been 11.
Right. Right.
But
yeah.
Back then,
still
boyhood
seems
probably didn't last forever.
No, it seems strange to me though, because you would think that somebody in that special position, being brought to the temple and being raised in the temple, you would think that their studies and their, how to be an acolyte, how to do this,
Sure,
would have started immediately in small ways.
Yeah.
Anyway.
but no, the pump was not primed.
Right,
That's what I'm going
right.
at. Yeah, it's all new, and it just shows that kind of the creativity of God, the kind of surprise that's still in there. There's just one innocuous night he starts getting called by God, and it's time, it's ready.
Mhm.
It's amazing. There's a fun little you can see a disagreement. Again, it's an oral culture, and then it's written down, and then when it's written down, they're not given chapter divisions, so later editors have to do this. And you get verse 1. Greg read it the way I'm interpreting it to be correct, which is verse 1a, you might want to call it, is actually the completion of a thought from chapter 3. And then 1b and c are kind of start chapter 4. Does that make sense? So you may have a division that's a little confusing there. But ending with, and the word of Samuel came to all Israel, should be the end of chapter 3, really.
Mhm.
And then we move to chapter 4, the Ark. Remember the Ark of the Covenants, containing the remnants of the 10 Commandments. We kind of lost track of it from where we left off reading the Old Testament months ago. So we're going to pick up a little bit. It kind of turns back into an Indiana Jones movie here for a second. Leslie, would you like to read chapter 4?
Yeah, it's fine.
Oh, great.
And the word of Samuel, I'm reading out of the NRSV.
Oh, good. And they have that as the first sentence. Great. Go for it.
And the word of Samuel came to all Israel. In those days, the Philistines mustered for war against Israel, and Israel went out to battle against them. They encamped at Ebenezer, and the Philistines encamped at Aphek. The Philistines grew up in line against Israel, and when the battle was joined, Israel was defeated by the Philistines. About 4,000 men on the battlefield of battle. When the troops came to the camp, the elders of Israel said, "Why has the Lord put us to rout today before the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord here from Shiloh, so that he may come among us and save us from the power of our enemies." So the people sent to Shiloh and brought from them there the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, who is enthroned on the cherubim. The 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark and the covenant of God. When the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all Israel gave a mighty shout so that the earth resounded. When the Philistines heard the noise of the shouting, they said, "What does this great shouting in the camp of the Hebrews mean?" When they learned that the ark of the Lord had come to the camp, the Philistines were afraid, for they said, "Gods have come into the camp." They also said, "Woe to us, for nothing like this has happened before. Woe to us, who can deliver us from the power of these mighty gods?" These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with every sort of plague in the wilderness. Take courage and be men, O Philistines, in order not to become slaves to the Hebrews as they have been to you. Be men and fight. So the Philistines fought. Israel was defeated, and they fled, everyone to his home. There was a very great slaughter, for there fell of Israel 30,000 foot soldiers.
Wow.
God was captured, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died.
Hmm.
Dan of Benjamin ran from the battle line and came to Shiloh the same day, with his clothes torn and with earth upon his head. When he arrived, Eli was sitting upon his seat by the road, watching, for his heart trembled for the ark of God. When the man came into the city and heard the news, all the city cried out. When Eli heard the sound of the outcry, he said, "What is this uproar?" Then the man came quickly and told Eli. Now Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes were set so that he could not see. The man said to Eli, "I have come from the battle. I fled from the battle today." "How did it go, my son?" The messenger replied, "Israel has fled before the Philistines. There has also been a great slaughter among the troops. Your two sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God has been captured." When he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell over backwards from his seat by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died. For he was an old man and heavy. He had judged Israel for 40 years. Now his daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, was pregnant, about to give birth. When she heard the news that the ark of God was captured, and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she bowed and gave birth, for her labor pains overwhelmed her. As she was about to die, the women attending her said to her, "Do not be afraid, for have you borne a son?" But she did not answer or give heed. She named the child Ichabod, meaning the glory has departed from Israel. Because the ark of God had been captured, and because of her father-in-law and her husband, she said, "The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured."
Hmm.
Can I ask a
Powerful,
question about
yeah.
Shiloh?
Yeah.
When did Shiloh become such an important spot in Israel? I mean, obviously, if that's where they were keeping the Ark of the Covenant, it had a special place.
Yeah.
A temple there. Was that like their primary temple at the time?
I guess, yeah, I think where the ark, David would know better probably, but where the ark is would be the primary temple, exactly.
Okay.
I can't remember when Shiloh popped in the scene. Good, yeah, go ahead.
This was pre-temple. This is pre-temple. There's not a temple.
Okay.
I thought there was one.
So that's the significance of Shiloh, do you know?
The tent of meeting, that's where that was housed there. And the temple had not yet been built. They just had the tabernacle that had been built for the wandering during the Hebrews wandering. And the reason this is such a tragic thing to them is because they believed that the Ark of the Covenant is where Yahweh's resided.
Right.
And so when the Ark was taken, God was no longer with them as far as they understood.
I think it's fair to say draw a parallel, or maybe not a parallel, draw a line down to today's Christianity and even in our own church, how we treat the Blessed Sacrament, how we treat we put the wine and the bread that are already consecrated in a vessel,
Mhm.
and we really do treat it as if Christ is present in the room, right? And it departs on Good Friday or Monday, Thursday. So it's something that it's actually there. We can draw a connection back to this too, where they have a physical object in which they think God is present in and believe it to be. And who's to say it's not true? It just turns out God can be present in a multiplicity of ways. Because he's already separately talking to Samuel. You're right. I don't know the significance of Shiloh, but it's where, I guess, at the time of the start of the story was where the tent with the ark was. And thank you, David. I've forgotten about the tenting chapter. Yes.
And this would be in the territory where the Levites were.
Yeah. I mean, the priest. Yeah. So Eli is kind of in that descendant as well. But it's such a vivid story, and Charity's back, and so we basically have we've switched back to warfare here. And we've got the Philistines are introduced. And I've got a note here about the Philistines, which I'll read in a sec. But the Philistines and the Israelites spar, and the Israelites lose 4,000. And then, as we heard Carol gasp, they get the ark, and then think, okay, we're saved. Here we go. And then they lose 30,000. And poor Eli sits there on a rocking chair on the hill and watches the whole thing, hears about the result, and then promptly falls over, cracks his neck, and dies. So what's happening? And then the mother is dying in childbirth. His daughter-in-law is dying in childbirth. And she says, she's basically speaking on multiple layers and levels here. Glory is exiled from Israel. Not just the ark is gone and God has left Israel, but the family, the line of Eli is dying before our very eyes. And then to them, the glory of God is departed forever. So they're not thinking about a line of succession or who's going to take over. They're saying this is it. This is the end. And it really is kind of a cliffhanger.
So this incident, this event, would this have been denoted as God's way of getting rid of Eli's lineage and all that? I mean, that, and the fact that God is no longer in the land, that's harsh punishment.
Yeah.
And I just looked up Shiloh real quick, Greg's, and it was an ancient city and sanctuary in Samaria. And it's where the tabernacle was moved to. It's where the first tabernacle was after the conquest of Canaan. The tabernacle was moved to Shiloh. That was their central place of worship for the Hebrews. And it was during the whole time of the Judges. And this is where the time of the Judges is ending. And then we'll go forward and see what happens with David and the Ark of the Covenant, things like that. But this was very much a sign of, they looked at it as a sign of God's disfavor, that God had left to their minds anyway.
Exactly. But what Eli is forgetting, and what no one else in the story knows, only we know, is that the previous chapter says God saying, I'm up to something. And I'm working on something. So to answer your question, Greg, there's if you're a person who thinks this is all part of God's plan and God's will, which I'm here to say that's a valid theology always. This is part of God's plan, and that you kind of had to sacrifice. So the ends justifies the means. You're gonna have to lose 34,000 troops in the process, and children dying in childbirth, but what's going to be happening in the grand scheme of things is far greater and better if that's the way you look at this, which is certainly how the Hebrews, the composers of the Old Testament, think of God. As there's got to be a plan to all of this. This is not circumstance.
But when David talks about the tabernacle, I mean, what do we have up there?
Right.
And how many years has it been that women couldn't even touch it?
Right, yeah.
And still in the Catholic tradition, you can't.
And I think there's a little bit of, I detect a message in here of just saying, you can't contain God.
No,
we
but
can,
we still
but
put
we,
the blessed,
you can ritualize
yeah, we put the
things for
blessed
human
wine
meaning.
and the blessed bread
Right.
or the wafers. We don't put the bread in there, but that's what we put in there.
Yeah. Well, and you and I've been having an offline conversation about different how priests
Uh-huh,
and altar guilds work together.
right.
You've got in me somebody who's like, I want to respect that, and I do to some extent believe it's blessed and all, but I also am not going to lose sleep over it if the sanctuary lamp candle goes out.
Yeah.
Or the bread,
Mhm.
we run out of bread in the tabernacle. It's not that Jesus is leaving us.
It's just,
It just means
Mhm.
we just
but I mean,
have a shortcoming. Yeah,
what gets me is how we've changed it over the years.
exactly.
And the interesting thing was the Catholic Church in Rockdale.
Yeah.
Last year at Christmas time, I was there when they were decorating because my friend wanted me to see the inside because it's a very wealthy church. And
Right,
so,
right.
I mean, they actually have gold on their walls.
Oh boy.
And the priest sent a
Right.
message, and I don't even know what it was that had to be taken back up into the sanctuary part, but none of the women could do it. And of course, my friend Dan was the only male that was there, and he says, "I don't know what to do with this." I said, "Well, Dan, I'd show you, but
Yeah, but I'm
I
not allowed
can't
to
go
touch
up
it.
there."
Oh, that's
Wow.
hard. That is hard.
They couldn't go up in the sanctuary?
They can't go. Well, the sanctuary is from the altar rail forward.
Oh, yeah.
Not here.
Not here.
Don't worry.
No,
I know
not
that, I
here.
understand that,
In
but
fact,
it's not
I've got
true at
children
all.
threatening to
You
come
guys-
climb into the
Yeah,
pulpit with me. Yeah.
You're lucky they
They're
don't climb
defined
into
the
that little
official-
space underneath
They're
the
not supposed
altar.
to be girl acolytes.
If Louise had
Oh,
found
really?
it, she may still be there. Yeah, just
Well,
hanging
Not in
out.
the Roman.
For the
church.
longest
This is all
time,
for me.
They
I mean,
define-
it
they
doesn't bother me. I think
define
it's
that
cute when
on
they
a
run
parish
out
or
there.
Maybe even on a
I feel,
diocesan
yeah,
level
for,
in some
when we were
cases,
kids,
but-
we couldn't even touch that you had to, they put it on your tongue.
Oh,
We
yeah.
couldn't even touch it.
Yeah.
The priest had, I guess the fingers, there's certain fingers were specifically blessed, so they could
Sure.
touch the consecrated
Amazing.
host.
David's trying to interject here.
I
Go
was
ahead.
just gonna say quickly, going back to Greg's question or his comment about that they clearly believed that this was God's will, that the Ark of the Covenant was captured and that all these people were killed. Another way of looking at it is that's the people's way of viewing what happened as they put the accounts together. It's their attempt to explain what was inexplicable to them. Why did God abandon them? Why was the ark captured? Why were all these people killed? It must have been something that happened. And as they wrote this, probably First Samuel was written somewhere after the first exile, where the northern kingdom was taken away, and in that a time of tragedy and all that, they're trying to explain why God's plan shifted and why he went from the family of Eli to another family, and then the monarchy came into place, which that was a whole process that led to their exile. So there are different ways of looking at that, in terms of, at least from our perspective right here, that whether God was actually willing that and doing that, or whether this was their way of explaining what had happened. So
I love that there's this brilliant, what I'm hearing you say is this feeling that God has abandoned you. Here it is made in almost a fairy tale way of just the physical ark is gone. They've lost all the battle. Eli falls over and dies. Just all of these things are signs to them. And yet you're right. If it's told in the exile, when Israel is literally been displaced by Babylonians, and they're wondering, where is God in all of this? Clearly we've been abandoned and all. You have this actually very pastoral, comforting story to say, remember when Eli sat on the hill and watched the ark get, lose in battle, and they thought it was over. And she said, Phinehas's wife says, glory is exiled from Israel. I mean, word for word, David, I would imagine, is words that Israelites were saying in the exile period as this was being composed into scripture. It's really powerful.
And then you look at what happens in the rest of Samuel and how God restores through, even though he didn't particularly choose a monarchy, but even through the monarchy, and ultimately in First Samuel, David is the full restoration of the monarchy. David is God's man, and he represents, God's new will and his for the nation. Yeah.
Right. It's meant to give hope. It really, and to remind us that, just take God for God's word, saying to Samuel, oh gosh, I can't find it in this one, but that I'm up to something, that I'm about to make a big change. To say that, not only can God not be contained in an ark alone, but that God has God's right. God has every right to just kind of change the way he deals with humans. And that's going to lead, like David said, to the monarchy. Whether or not that's exactly what God had envisioned, that's fine, because it's a two-way street for God, always. I want to see what humans are up to. But oh yeah, go ahead, Leslie.
Yeah, I wonder what happened to the baby.
What happened to the baby? That is a great question that I don't know the answer to.
I don't know if we can, if he's mentioned later on or not, or if he was, because he is still part of the line of Eli.
Yeah.
So did the baby die, or did the baby live? I mean, it sounded like the baby didn't die because they didn't say anything about it.
Right.
And the thing that got me, and when I was reading this, when she the women who attended her said, "Do not be afraid, for you have born a son." That just reminds me, and when the angel said, "You will born a son, and it will be Jesus." It just reminded me of that do not fear, for you will have a son. And it just made me think about Jesus's birth.
Yeah, absolutely. It multiple meanings, and one of them too is it's don't be afraid, you had a son, you didn't have a daughter.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
That's also part of it too. Good news, it's a boy. That means you're going to be the queen consort, or there's a little bit of that, which
taken care of for the rest of your life.
I don't know if I can recommend it because of the graphic sex and nudity and language and gore.
Sounds good so far.
But if I've whet your appetite, I'm talking about House of the Dragon, which is on HBO, yeah, which is a prequel to Game of Thrones.
Oh yeah.
And likewise Game of Thrones, but House of the Dragon is more so than its progenitor, about women's roles in a male-dominated society of kingships and things. And I think people are often trying to draw political parallels to today, and that's fair, but it really bears the closest resemblance to the tribes of Israel to me, and the warfare between things like Philistines and Israelites, and purity battles, and kingships, and children's, and women dying in childbirth because they've been impregnated so many times because they keep giving birth to women. And it's fascinating. But it's mostly told from the women's point of view. Don't get me wrong, it's wonderful. But I think that's a recommendation. But I'm hearing echoes of that here, because hey, good news, you've got a son. But the good news is in the backdrop of the ark leaving, and her interpretation. The good news is the glory of God has exiled us, has left us behind. So it's really profound.
Okay.
And this thing of the son being born, I mean, that's still today.
Still today.
In the monarchy.
Pass on my name.
I mean, England just, in the last year, put Charlotte in line.
Yeah.
And I mean, look at
and I'm sure there's people that are like, you can't do that.
And look at the centuries that's passed in that period. So I think the son here, I mean, I don't think we get any more about it.
Right.
But the line is still there.
I just looked that up.
Ichabod.
Yeah, Ichabod shows up later in First Samuel 14.
Oh, okay.
And it just says that they're talking about all the men around Saul, and one of them is the son of his
Phineas's
brother.
wife. Oh, here you go. Yeah.
So she had another son, and he's well known enough to mention him later.
Yep.
So we don't know what happened, but he sticks around. She has more children.
So they're still involved in the society. It's just that they're not in the business of being judges anymore,
right?
Which is because that's changing to prophets, and that's who Samuel's going to be.
At least that's what I looked up. Dave,
No,
if
I
you
think
find
that's
something
right.
else, let me know.
And then, of course,
that's exactly what I found too. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Charity.
It's a good question, Leslie, but he turns out to be a little bit of a minor figure in scripture, but
The
and then, of
mother,
course-
the mother does die.
does die. Yeah.
Yeah, dies in this.
It's and then he ends up chasing the headless horseman, I believe, right?
Yeah.
What happens? Right. Trying to keep it together. All right.
Right month.
On that note, I think we're safely under the wire for the fire alarm.
That'll happen
Thank you all so
hopefully in a
much, and we'll see you next week.
Okay.
Take care.
We do chapter 5.
We'll do chapter 5 next week.
Tomorrow
Yeah.
night, Lost is at your house.